got the British monarchs out of the way after a solid chunk of time.
Eventually.
So this episode, we were planning on doing the American Revolutionary War.
Eventually, yes, but
the logistics haven't worked out on that one for the moment.
More
we will get to that.
More specifically, our guest has not been available.
Yeah,
which,
like I say,
it's an understandable shame, but we will get to it eventually.
Yeah, the job he works is quite time consuming. Like I say, I used to do the job. I never had time to do much else.
Right.
So
okay.
we will get there, but so we've decided to talk about. I don't know if serious is the right word because most of what we're talking about with history is serious anyway. But I suppose.
Well, it's quite a dark turn.
Yeah,
from our previous
dark
topic.
might be the best term for it. Well, dark might be a tame term for it. It's very.
Well, if you wanted to explain it in the most realistic terms, we would probably have this episode taken down before we even started. So.
Yeah, if it wasn't under the idea of history and educational, if we put this on YouTube, it would be immediately demonetised.
We'd probably be put on a watch list.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, so Unit 731 of the Japanese variety, because it's technically not an army group, it's like well, I'll get to that. It's a very misleading name. Very misleading name. So I believe you said you had a warning type of thing.
Yes.
I'll let Matthew take that one away for a minute.
Thank you. So, the Day Historia podcast and all of its affiliated media does not endorse or condone anything mentioned within this episode of the podcast. And this episode will include very violent and gruesome imagery and commentary on topics such as rape, physical and sexual abuse, murder, summary executions, and war crimes of all varying levels of atrocity. So, you've had your warning, discretion is advised.
Yeah, if you're squeamish, I'd probably give yourself a pre-warning.
And if you're eating, I'd suggest you stop.
Yes. So
don't have like the family round the table listening to this over dinner.
Unless you are all not okay in the head when all of you listen please. Yeah.
But there it is.
That's the warning.
You've got your warning.
So you can't be shocked by what we're going to be talking about right now.
So from here on out, if you're disgusted, that's on you.
Yes, we've warned you.
Right.
So
go ahead.
Japanese Unit 731. It was the most famous cases of what they did is during World War II. However, the year it was actually founded was 1937. So in the 6 years of the war, there was, I'll say from 37 to 45 when it was disbanded, when the Japanese surrendered. Death toll is estimated, death toll, not casualty total, as in like injured and things like that, 200 to 300,000 people.
For one unit? That's
yes, and this is the worst case. There is other units of the same type of thing that also did this. They're not solely the only ones, they're just the most famous and probably the worst that we know of. There was probably other things that other units did that were worse, but these were the ones that did everything worse, not just little bits. Everything was beyond fucked. None of these people involved in this unit were okay in their head. Let's put it that way. They had to be mentally deficient in some sort of sick way. Same way like a murderer, like a mass murderer that like sort of Jeffrey Dahmer type. They're not okay in the head.
I suppose the only comparison that I could think of, seeing as I don't know a lot about the Pacific theatre when it comes to World War II and like the
Pacific is
the Sino-Japanese War to precede it, and like all of the wars between Japan and China before it. But like in terms of what my knowledge is of World War II, I'd say the only thing that I could compare it to really would be the Derlevanger Brigade, which was a unit of it was a penal battalion within the that were used on the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
And in places like gone in concentration camps. They were also known as the 33rd, I think it was, 36th Grenadier Division
Right.
within the SS, and they operated mostly in like Belarus, the Eastern Front, mostly in southern Russia.
That was a lot of where the worst things happened with the German SS. It was,
and also in the Warsaw Uprising in 1944.
Yeah.
And when the SS criticises your conduct on the Eastern Front, that's when you know it's bad. But that's the only thing I can really think of as a comparison.
I think the best thing to describe it would be the German Holocaust. But that is, if the German Holocaust is like a 6, this is a 10. Like maybe an 11. That's the level this is.
But also you can't really compare it to the Holocaust in that way, because the Holocaust was I'd say an international extermination of people groups.
Yeah.
Whereas this was just a singular unit within the Japanese military.
Yes, and most of the people that were experimented on were Chinese communists, prisoners. That's pretty much all of the experiments and things we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Essentially were Chinese communist prisoners. They were.
Whereas like the Holocaust, especially with the experimentations by the Nazi scientists, if you can even call them scientists.
You see, it's a lot of level of Mengele. It's on that sort of sadistic, sick in the head
within that
realm of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That would probably be the best comparison. Would be, whereas Mengele was one man with a few people. This was thousands of people doing this willingly. Like nobody ever questioned this.
Okay.
So
let's start from the beginning.
Yes. So when they were formed in 37, did I say?
Yes, you said 37.
They were called the. Let me get this right. The Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. The Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. That was their official name. That could not be. Well, I can't be any further from the truth, because the idea behind...
It was clearly a cover name.
It wasn't, because the idea behind everything they did involved a lot of diseases and how to treat diseases and how it... So I'll explain more, but it did involve a lot of disease. So I can understand the epidemic prevention part. That bit I get. But the water purification, that
just didn't...
Not really, no. So that was the name when they were founded. And the general in command of the department, air quotation marks, was General Shiro Ishii. Okay. He was he considered himself to be some sort of scientist as well as a military commander.
Okay.
He believed, that's again, helping people and how to save people from certain things. He wanted to look into experiments on people, specifically live people, on just how things affected their body. So one of the things that he did, that's probably the tamest thing that he did, he would, what disease was it? I think it was gangrene. So he'd willingly infect Chinese communist prisoners with gangrene. It would actively force them to be infected by gangrenous wounds, and when it was affected the body, so say it affected the arm of a man, when it started getting really bad, he would cut off the left arm. He was completely still alive at this point. There was hardly ever did anything on dead people. So he was a live man with his left arm cut off. He would then cut off his right arm that was perfectly fine, and sew the body parts back on backwards. So he'd put the right arm on the left arm and the left arm on the right arm to find out if the body would know that the gangrenous body part was on the other side, or whether it would try to heal it, or then both body parts would then get gangrene.
Right.
Yeah, that's... It's to explain, because...
Starting off strong.
Yeah, so he wanted to find out if the body could stop gangrene by swapping body parts. So if they got gangrene in the left leg and not, then he'd swap the body parts over and sew them back up.
I mean, the phrase going to come up, there has to be a better way to do that. And
There is, clearly. I don't know that. I'm not a scientist of that level. I can't say I've got the scientific knowledge to be able to figure that out. But he was himself. These were the experiments and things that he would do actively himself. So he would perform live vivisections on men that were infected with gangrene and do this himself. Pretty much everything else after this is him being in charge, being the one that oversaw everything and telling the people to do these atrocities. So like I said, that's himself. That's just the level of sick he was. He wanted to cut off people's body parts, swap them over for his own benefit. He wanted to check these things. One of the other things that he had a weird obsession, well, the whole unit itself, but they all had a weird obsession with syphilis.
Right.
They had a weird, like, what they'd do was they would infect a man with syphilis. They'd give a man syphilis and force him to rape women. Force him to rape a woman.
Oh.
That's not the worst part. I would say that's the nicest part. At least somebody... Well, no, right. I don't... Nobody's enjoying that. They're being forced to rape. But so what they'd do is they would force these men to then rape the woman. They would then, like, entrap the man in his own place by himself. And they'd treat the men differently. So they'd feed and look after one man like it was normal. They would treat a man with syphilis. One of them would be without food, but the rest of it water and fed and treated normally. No water. Like every type of living situation you could think of.
So just like one man, as you said, treat normally with their like daily rations, daily water ration, everything like that.
Yeah, they had comforts. Things like that.
One was treated differently, and the next.
They'll all be treated differently to find out the best way to treat syphilis for a man. They'd also do the same thing with the women whilst they were pregnant. If a woman didn't show signs of being pregnant, they would repeatedly force men to rape these women until they were pregnant, whilst contracting syphilis. So they wanted to find out how syphilis affected a fetus.
Right.
But they weren't content in checking how the mother was and checking stomachs with stethoscopes or something like that, where they'd just be like, right, how are you feeling today? Is this, and this? No. At different stages of the pregnancies, with different conditions and this, that and the other, they would open the woman up live through the stomach and find out how well the fetus was growing.
Right.
So these women were being experimented on whilst they were still alive at different stages of their pregnancies. So one at the beginning, so they'd find out how the baby was when it first contracted syphilis. So does this syphilis affect the baby? Turns out yes it does. They found this out by cutting the woman open. And then do this at different points in the pregnancy. So first trimester, second, third. Sometimes if a woman had syphilis worse than another, they'd cut her open to find out how that affected the baby. Sometimes they'd just not touch the woman at all, leave her be, find out how the baby looked when it came out after 9 months with syphilis. 9 times out of 10 after this whole was finished, they would kill everyone. Fetuses included. They didn't want to worry about looking after children. So if they felt they needed to, they'd just kill the baby. Kill the baby, kill the mother. The father's already dead because more than likely they've treated him poorly while he's got syphilis, so he's died of syphilis. So that was... And like I said, there was something else to do with syphilis.
We're not even 20 minutes in.
Yes. So the women that they raped weren't necessarily older women. They were... Everywhere that I looked, that I've seen, that's explained to me about Unit 731 and these specific...
underage girls?
Not necessarily underage. The quotation marks around almost everything was childbearing age women.
Well, I mean, childbearing age women can start bearing children as young
Yes.
as when they start their period.
Yes.
Which
so
is
anywhere,
usually
sometimes I've heard of women being
start usually around. Oh God, when do women
anywhere between 8 and 14.
That's
Yes.
bad.
Yes. So it can be anywhere from the age of 8 to whenever a woman is in menopause. So they do all this from an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old, possibly a 52-year-old woman if she's not quite hit menopause yet. So this would be at all different stages of how a woman was health-wise beforehand, after. Like, this wasn't just, how does the syphilis affect the baby? This was, how does the woman affected with syphilis affect the baby? So they'd have to do it on all different types of women. But whilst these... So they'd also, after raping these women with syphilis, if they didn't fall pregnant, like if they were unable to bear a child, they would proceed to find the best way to... I don't think best ways, different ways of killing these women. So
Right.
even when they were pregnant as well, this was... So the women that they impregnated weren't with syphilis. They were just completely healthy, active women that were just prisoners, unfortunately, at the time. They fell pregnant, either raped or somebody they were prisoners with, they had a baby, this, that and the other. And whilst these women were pregnant, they would beat them and find out how the beatings affect the babies sometimes, or just decided to beat the women whilst they were pregnant. They would strangle them, kill them, find how long it takes for the fetus to die inside the woman after being killed. Different stages of pregnancy again, and they would use different types of gases to essentially, like, the best way to describe it was the way they gassed the Jews, the Germans. They'd do a similar thing but with pregnant women, so that they find out if certain gases would affect the baby, if it killed, if it knocked people out, if it did anything to anything. So everybody was alive. If it was don't need it anymore. It's not useful. Why do we need a dead thing if we're trying to figure out what things are like alive? So if something died, it was just thrown away, discarded, either probably burnt, because they like to find out. Speaking of burning, they would round up a group of people. They'd have a group that were completely naked, a group that were wearing different types of clothing, in different types of environments, and they would burn, like, essentially use flamethrowers, what were used as flamethrowers, however they did it, and burn a group of people to find out how it affected their bare skin, how it affected their body parts, what burned and what was destroyed inside the body, what wasn't. And then with the people that were wearing clothes, find out how long it took for the burning to go through the clothing, or if it did do anything, how long it took them to die and burn alive. They'd talk about essentially torturing these people to find out how long it took for them to show signs of effect. So if it 30 seconds to burn to death, they'd put that down, blah blah blah. Find out the bodies and find out what was burnt, how it burnt, what was burnt the worst.
Okay, so maybe the De La Venga Brigade wasn't the best comparison, because at that point that was just a bunch of convicted criminals in an SS penal battalion.
Yes.
That weren't really scientists. This would, probably be more in comparison with Dr. Josef Mengele and his cohort of scientists.
Like I say, so these experiments is not all of the experiments, because I'll talk about that towards the end. To be fair, there's not much more to talk about in terms of what happened, because a lot of this was just, there was a lot of these things going on. It wasn't just a few things, it was a lot of the same experiments with different conditions. So it wasn't necessarily a amount thing, it was more of it was quality over quantity, or probably both, a bit of quality and quantity. So there was a physiologist called Yoshimura Hisato? That one there. Yoshimura Hisato.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, so essentially what he would do was he would have live subjects and he would encase them in a tub of ice water until they either froze or got hypothermia, and he'd find out how long it took for these people to get hypothermia or a frostbite or freeze to death or anything, how long it took people at different temperatures of water to get to that point. So if they were still alive, so say he'd put them in a tub of freezing water for hours and they came out with frostbite on their arm or leg or whatever, what he would do was, these are eyewitnesses of people that have explained what they saw after he'd taken them out. So one of the nicest things he did possibly was he would leave some of them to thaw out themselves. So see how long it took for these people with frostbite that he'd given them. See how long it took them to naturally heal from frostbite or hypothermia or just being generally frozen. See how long it took for them to heal themselves. So he just get on with whatever they were doing in prison and just left them to it, and just every now and then check back with them, see what they were doing and what they felt like. However, sometimes he described it as he watched them hit a frostbite and frozen leg with a cane. Apparently it'd sound like if somebody was hitting a plank of wood.
Oh.
Because he wanted to find out if the body would know that the body was frozen and smashed, or if it was strong enough to withstand that. Because normally if you just hit a leg with a cane, it'd just probably leave a mark and kill for a while and hurt and this and the other. So he wanted to find out if the body reacted the same way.
But I mean, if you hit it particularly hard, it would probably do some damage to the bone. But
bearing in mind it's frozen, so if you hit a block of ice hard enough with a metal cane,
it would shatter.
Exactly. So he was shattering people's body parts in order to find out if it would hurt.
Gee, who would have thought?
Yeah. So he would, and he'd place them in different places. So he'd hit them as soon as they came out sometimes. So they were freshly frozen, they had frostbite, and he'd go hit the leg. We're using leg as an example, it could have been anything. Heads, legs, arms, torso, anything. He'd hit it and find out how the person reacted. If it hurt them, if they didn't feel anything, if it broke, if nothing happened, anything. But then sometimes he'd leave it a day and then do the same thing to this person that's been thawed out for a day. So he'd do this experiment at different levels of the frostbite and frozen, and even when people's legs were completely healed, he'd choose to hit them again to find out if the leg still had full functionality or whether it was permanently disabled or changed with the nerves, basically. If it was the leg, he'd hit legs, find out if one hurt more than the other. So once he'd done that, I suppose he was satisfied with his results, because he was happy to, on other people that he'd frozen, he would also burn them. So he would encase their whole body in this frozen water, freeze their bodies, give them frostbite, hypothermia, so on, and take them out and use a flamethrower, like these people did on the bearskins and happened before, whilst they were still frozen. So if you get an ice burn, or you put your hand on ice or anything, and then you put it on a warm surface, what happens? Science. It fucking hurts. So imagine you getting flamethrowered down after just being frozen. That's gonna hurt like an absolute hell.
Fire and ice.
Yes. And so he wanted to find out if it would kill the people or whether it would just de-ice them, if it'd bring them back to normal quickly. I think we can all assume what happened there. I'm pretty sure none of those people survived.
No, probably not.
Because it wasn't just a case of, shoot them a little bit, warm them up. No, it was fully solid
Well,
amount of time.
Considering what flamethrowers do normally.
Yeah.
You know.
So they wanted to find out if being frozen would stop you from being burned alive with a flamethrower, because we know during the Pacific campaign, the Americans used flamethrowers. They weren't necessarily used in the European theatre war, but in the Pacific.
Well, I mean, the Germans also used flamethrowers as well,
Yeah,
didn't they?
But the Americans themselves, they only really used it in the Pacific Theatre War because of how the Japanese used to fight. I mean, the tactic, I believe, was officially named the burn 'em out tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were in mountain caves and underground trenches, and they'd use the flamethrowers to burn them out.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen video evidence of people just when they're burnt alive. It's horrific. So imagine doing that to people after just being frozen. It's not. I'm so happy there's not video evidence of that. And if there is, I don't ever want to see that.
No.
Because I'm not sure if this was ever, like...
You're not going to find that sort of thing on YouTube, are you?
I don't know where you could find that if it existed.
Don't,
and I'm not...
probably.
Yeah, I'm condoning that. Don't ever look that up, please.
Please don't.
Please don't. Because we're not...
Your eyes will thank you. And your stomach.
I'm not being responsible for you being able to find something like that, because I'm pretty certain seeing that might possibly just be illegal to see.
Like, well, I mean, if you want to do it, we can't stop you, but also somebody will. Because that's that is probably on the equivalence of, say, having child porn on your computer. Probably.
I'm not a... That's
Probably
relative.
It's the same amount of legality.
Yeah, possibly.
Because this stuff would be... It's the same sort of amount of gruesomeness, just within different categories.
Yeah.
Please continue.
I suppose something good came out of these experiments, because, yeah, I know you're raising your eyebrows and not believing me, but
Sure?
Yes, something did come out of this that was useful. It was so this man has frozen these people alive, give them hypothermia, and he's technically trying to cure them of this hypothermia. He's trying to find out the best way to stop these people from just frozen to death.
Well, I mean, at that point in the war as well, I mean, at that point in time as well, like dying of hypothermia and like freezing to death and everything like that was very common.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it still happens today when people just aren't just a bit stupid and don't warm enough.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, the kinds of facilities and
especially the most famous case being the Battle of the Bulge.
The Battle of the Bulge, or the Battle of Stalingrad as
yeah,
well.
Just not having enough winter clothing. Most of the German army during the my brain's gone blank for a second there.
The Battle of the Bulge.
No, the campaign in Russia.
Into Russia, yeah.
None of the soldiers really had enough supplies. That was a major reason for them having to come back out, was they didn't have enough.
Yeah.
That was the idea, to go in to get the supplies, but it didn't work out for them, fortunately. But so, done all these experiments, he's actually, surprisingly, find out the perfect way to cure people of hypothermia.
Right.
So basically, whilst doing these all experiments, he's also then gone from freezing them to encasing them in water, just hot water. So it's anywhere from essentially fire water, so scalding hot water that if you put your hand in, your hand would probably burn off.
You get scalding burns.
Yeah, like it would leave you with permanent scars level of hot. Then it could bring it all the way down to just regular tap water. So just a bit chilly.
Room temperature.
Yeah, water, anywhere between that. And he found the exact right temperature to cure hypothermia without causing any lasting damage to the body. Quickly as well. I think it was like between 100 and 123 degree water or something like that. It could heal your hypothermia. But bearing in mind, he's found this out, however, how often the fact that you have hypothermia, have you got enough water at this specific temperature to encase your whole body? It's I don't,
I was
a viable option.
I was just going to say, that almost makes up for it all.
Doesn't. No,
No, the hell it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. I think.
Could you not detect the hints of sarcasm?
Right. I was start making a TikTok for this. That might be the first TikTok. Your voice thing that this almost makes up.
It almost makes up for it all.
Yeah, that might be the first TikTok, Matthew Shipley. I'm exposing your name so people understand what you think in your head, Matthew.
It's almost like it's revolutionary healthcare.
Yes, the man was a hero to the people of Japan.
And China.
Please, that had to be sarcasm, please.
Of course it's fucking sarcasm. Come on, man. What do you take me for?
Somebody that's just hearing the fact that there's Japanese people killing live pregnant women infected with syphilis.
Mate, I already knew about the rape of Nanjing. I knew that they were doing this already on a massive scale. Hell, the only person to survive that entire rape of Nanjing thing was the consul general from Germany. And he said he was horrified by what he saw. And they were supposed to be allies.
It was a weird alliance of the Japanese, and I think it was just alliance through circumstance.
It was just an alliance of convenience, mostly.
Yeah, but so I suppose, and honestly, out of the whole thing, that was the only good thing that came out of everything.
Relatively good.
I suppose it moved science forward that little step of everything.
While setting it back about 500?
Yes. So we're on many steps back to go like a quarter step forward.
Yeah.
So he was all just not okay in the head. And the soldiers involved in these units were handpicked. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if wanted to was the right word, but they had no issue in doing these things to these people. I think a lot of them hated the Chinese communist.
Well, I mean,
they had deep hatred.
Considering that the Japanese had like a very bad reputation during the entirety of the Second World War with how they treated their prisoners.
Yeah. And each other sometimes.
And each other.
And
themselves.
Yeah.
It's just like surrender just wasn't an option for them. So
no. So they would kill themselves on the off chance that they kill one American soldier. That was. I suppose that just sums up the Japanese.
That's why it was so infamous.
Yeah. They believed that they were dying to a higher power, essentially.
Yeah, dying for Japan, essentially. Yeah. And considering that most of the time they were incredibly effective for the resources they took up. Kamikaze attacks could have knocked out an American warship for months.
Yeah.
If they hit the right part of the warship.
Yeah.
And they miss. Or anything like that.
Yeah, and you don't need to worry about fueling it enough, because you just fuel it enough to take off, and then that little bit to go towards the ship, and then essentially it's shut engine off, go, essentially.
To be fair, that's actually a myth. They didn't actually fill I'm assuming you're operating on the assumption that they only gave them half a tank of fuel.
Sort of, yeah. Saying
that's actually a myth.
Yeah, I'm sort of saying it's not using many resources.
Instead of half a tank of fuel, they'd instead fill the plane with explosives, just so.
Ah, right.
Maximum damage.
Yeah, of course. That makes sense. Like I said, I didn't necessarily mean it specifically half tank of fuel. I mean in terms of it didn't cost the Japanese army much to go do a kamikaze attack. It was
considering the restock up, they were quite effective.
Yeah, and like I said, this was the opposite end of that scale.
Yeah,
it's them killing other people
instead of sacrificing themselves for what they thought was right.
Yeah,
by introducing their face to the deck of an American warship.
Yes,
it was
the same people doing the same things, but to other people they didn't like.
The same people committing atrocities that make the whole look like a picnic.
Yeah, and do you know what? This is the bit that I was talking about before. This makes the whole thing worse.
Yeah.
And do you know what? It's the Americans' fault, specifically General MacArthur. Mm-hmm.
Wait, hold on. You're going to have to explain that one.
I will. I'll get to that. When we found about the Holocaust, the concentration camps, the work camps, the mass amount of murders and the gassing of the minorities and this, that and the other, when we found out about all of that, horrified. Obviously, it's horrific. It was a genocide of people that didn't do anything wrong, simply because they were born different. They were mass murdered.
And this is like when it was under like Eisenhower, who was like, you know, the supreme commander in the West.
Yeah.
With like all the British, French, and American units, all, and Canadian and what have you, all amalgamated under this one command under Eisenhower.
Yes. So when we found out about that, horrified, obviously, and we wanted these Nazi German officers and the people involved in this. I mean, the Nuremberg trials, for Christ's sake, we wanted to punish these people, obviously. We wanted to give them punishments worthy of the things that they did. So the Nazis and the people involved in that were condemned, obviously. They were
either lengthy prison sentences for some, or for the people who were particularly involved, it would be death sentences, like the highest Nazi leaders, like generals, field marshals, all those sorts of things. Like Hermann Goering, for instance, or lengthy prison sentences for people who weren't quite as involved, but you know were still affiliated with it and were still loyal to the Hitler regime. And then like Nazi scientists, there was a whole separate thing of trials for the Nazi scientists.
Yes.
And if he would have been caught, it would have been Josef Mengele would have been the star defendant, and he probably would have been sentenced to death. But no, he escaped to the
So, but he was condemned. Enjoyed the fact that he was still alive. Nobody wanted that. So, the Americans then obviously condemned the Germans, this, that and the other. So they treated them like that for doing what they did. Obviously, this specific example we've just been talking about is worse.
Yes.
I think we can all agree that what they've done here is worse than what the Holocaust was, essentially. Full immunity. General MacArthur granted, especially Ishii, the general in charge of this whole department of whatever the microbiology and all this, that and the other, granted everybody involved in this full immunity because they provided the Americans with all of... I don't know if it's 100% because I don't think you could probably...
Most of.
Yes, I don't think you could agree to... Probably we're doing other things we'll never ever find out about. When the Japanese army surrendered and when the Red Army was closing in on Japan, they burnt everything to the ground. They destroyed everything. Basically like scorched earth tactics. Everybody get out, let's destroy it all so nobody else can find it. So when the Japanese army surrendered, obviously this unit had to surrender, and Ishii didn't want to die, obviously. I mean, he was probably a man that thought very highly of himself. So when he went to agree to... The Americans sent a scientist over to Japan to work with the Japanese on things. And when he reported back to MacArthur about this Unit 731, decided that he would grant the entire people full immunity from any sort of punishment and basically sweep it all under the rug. Nobody knew about this except the people involved. No one knew about this. And he granted them full immunity on the basis that they provided the Americans with all of their research and everything that they found out and all of their experiments. If they provided the Americans solely with all of this information, then MacArthur would wipe their slate clean. I think a lot of the higher ranking officers as well were given like sort of witness protection in America. So they were given a very lucrative life, they were paid a lot of money, given houses, given a comfortable life after doing all this. And the top American command knowing about it. So they wanted to do all this because of they did a lot of work with like gas, so they wanted to find out how all this information was helpful or this, that and the other. Essentially, the idea was, we want all this information, so Russia can't have it.
Right.
The Cold War was beginning, obviously.
That definitely seems like a MacArthur thing to do.
Fuck the commies.
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck the commies, that was the idea. And so he granted the entire unit full diplomatic and punishment immunity, so the Russians didn't win. To me, that makes this whole thing worse.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't until quite recently, like in the last 20, 30, 40 years sort of time, that we've learnt about these things happening. We still only have very limited amounts of information. Like what I've explained to you is probably the extent of what we know. There's probably bits and pieces I'm missing out. Probably I can't really remember that well. And like I say, there's things that the sources that I found don't include some of the things that happened. And like I say, it's almost guaranteed that this is not all of what these people did. Like I say, you're not going to fully admit to everything on the basis that you probably want to get away with some of it.
No, and like the post-war occupation of Japan was like quite because it was not limited to Unit 731 because as far as I'm aware, it was
army
across the whole Japanese military.
Yeah,
like
like I said, this wasn't the only case.
Like the American people wanted even like even Emperor Hirohito. They wanted him on trial for war crimes.
Oh yeah, this is the war crimes in my opinion. I don't know if I've seen anything worse than that. Because, like I say, it's not okay. It's just not okay, to say the least. And like I said, the fact that America, solely because they wanted to have a leg up on Russia, they decided that. So none of these people were condemned and punished for what they did. They got away with it. 99% of the people that were involved died before we found out about any of this. So it was, to me, that just makes it all worse because basically the Americans have, I don't know if accepted it is the right word, but not. I don't know what's the words.
They've not condemned it.
Essentially they've not.
If it was probably like released to the press in its entirety and like news articles and documentaries and everything were made on it, people would be horrified.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And like those sorts of things would not be available in Japan because absolutely not.
I mean, you can't even have a swastika in Germany for obvious reasons.
Like a swastika is banned in Germany, but like in like Japan and China and everything like that, it's still considered a symbol.
Yeah.
And it still is. You see it on temples as you're going in. It's a symbol of good luck. But, well, that's what it was originally anyway.
Technically, the swastika is only a symbol of war. So, but like you said, the fact that the Americans are perfectly okay with this is. Well, I don't mean Americans as a general broad term.
It's just not widely known.
No.
Like within the Pentagon. The top of the CIA.
Even a lot of everything didn't know about Unit 731.
No,
it was essentially MacArthur and his inner circle. They were the only people that knew about this, and they kept this to themselves for a leg up on Russia.
Yep, and then it was probably all declassified. This sort of stuff would not be condoned in Japan because absolutely not. I mean, most of the time when people want to. In Japan, when Japanese people want to come out and like condemn the Japanese atrocities they committed during the war, they are immediately shot down.
Yes.
Like they are within like Japan's very base society, they are considered outcasts. They are shamed life of condemnation and
rightly so.
Which could the only thing I really can compare it to in that case would be defeatism in like the last years of war in Nazi Germany. Like people were executed for defeatism at that point during the war, whereas nowadays you're not going to get executed because of course not, because it's civil enough now to know that just don't kill people for that.
Suppose
you don't kill people for that.
No.
But instead it's just the next worst thing, which is just
I suppose we could call Japan civil now compared to any
shame.
other point in their history. I think
they're still holding on a base society a little bit to the point where it can be to their detriment. But so we're not here to judge an entire society.
Of course not. The whole point of this podcast is to explain and talk about things. This is not us saying
we're not a political show either. We're a history podcast.
Yeah, of course. We obviously have views and opinions and things like that, but it's never a case of we don't judge people for doing what they did. unless it's something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just for political or religious reasons or things along that realm, it's a case of you do what you want, but I will have my opinion.
I mean, like you said about them getting like full immunity as
Yes.
well. I mean, like I've been making comparisons to Nazi Germany and like the post-war in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd say a comparison of this scale to what General Ishii ended up getting this, which full immunity and essentially a Japanese version of witness protection.
Yes.
The only real comparison I could make would probably be to what was his name, Hans Adler, General Oberst or Colonel General Hans Adler. And for those who don't know who he is, he was the primary architect behind Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet.
That's what I was trying to
invasion
remember
of
earlier.
the Soviet
Barbarossa,
Union.
yeah, that's my brain stopped working now.
Yes, but the invasion of the Union was essentially his. I say his baby, but
it was
his it was all him. Like he planned this thing its entirety. As much as Hitler wanted to ruin it with his military decisions, we know how militarily incompetent he was, much to the detriment of his general staff.
Yeah.
But
we will have a it'll be an episode on Hitler at some point.
There will be. There will obviously be an episode on
possibly 3
on Hitler, one of the worst.
I mean, we could have an episode specifically for Hitler, the beginning of Hitler's life, for Christ's sake. Like the man was.
We could probably make 5-part series just on Hitler, but but like as I was going to say, Hans Adler is probably like the only comparison I could make on this because at the Nuremberg trials he was obviously in the general's trial, which was like the condemnation of like all the high command. So it wouldn't have been Wilhelm Keitel specifically the chief of the high command because he was within the trial. So like. He was there with like Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop, all those kinds of people.
Yes.
Whereas Adler was in the general's trial, which was like condemned like most of the like the worst ones were of course sentenced to death, as like a lot of the Nuremberg trials.
Yes.
But Hans Adler was one of those ones that got a lengthy prison sentence, and like most people, like they wanted to. The occupying authorities, like Soviets, because the Soviets were terrible in that regard, they wanted to more like reconcile with Germany and rehabilitate Germany rather than just punish it like at the start of World War One.
That was essentially the reason for World War Two.
It was why financial reparations weren't able.
Yeah. I mean, we know the issues Germany had.
It was one of the driving forces behind why World War II started anyway, so they didn't want a repeat.
That's right. We know the issues that Germany had with the Marks.
So like Germany was rehabilitated mostly by the Western powers, and became a Western democracy now, and has formed the Germany that we know today. Whereas
not necessarily at the same level it always has been, but it's still on that level of being a world power.
It's still on that list.
It's stronger than most countries.
But well, Europe's kind of diminishing at the minute. But
that's fair.
We're not here to talk about modern day.
No.
And we're getting off topic because like with Adler, a lot of generals were given lengthy prison sentences, but they were also released early.
Yeah.
Even in the East, even with East Germany and everything like that, they were still like released early, allowed to move to East Germany once they had been like converted to communism and everything like that.
Yeah.
And were even given positions within the what was it? VA. The Nationale Volksarmee.
Yeah.
I said that wrong.
I know what you mean.
The People's Army.
Yeah.
In English, which was the East German army, and were given like generals' positions and everything like that. They didn't last very long because the army was very conservative during the war, and probably still were, apart from a few.
For the people that aren't fully understanding, East Germany and West Germany was separate entities entirely just after the war. East Germany was communist Russian, that sort of thing.
East Germany was communist.
West
Germany was Western democratic.
Yeah, with
But
it was split into sections.
But yeah, like Adler, along with a lot of other generals, were released early,
yeah,
or just didn't see trial at all in some cases, like Gerd von Rundstedt, Erich von Manstein, all those kinds of people.
Yeah.
With Adler, he was a proprietor, a top proprietor of what was known as the Clean Wehrmacht myth.
right. I'm not sure I know about this.
Well, the Clean Wehrmacht myth was basically perpetrated by like all the way from lowly soldiers, all the way to like Knights Cross holders, all the way up to generals, all the way up to top generals. Within the Wehrmacht, basically perpetrated the myth that the Wehrmacht were like the honourable arm of the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And conducted them like a similar fashion to how the Americans or the British or the French conducted themselves.
Right.
And this is mostly based on like the North Africa campaign.
Right.
Specifically with Erwin Rommel and like that. And it kind of tries to. Now the North Africa campaign itself wasn't particularly honourable as the myth goes to believe, but it tries to expand that myth of the honourable North African campaign to the entirety of the Wehrmacht, which just wasn't true.
No, of course not.
Which just wasn't true.
Yeah.
But it's basically similar to the way, except these people weren't perpetrating. The Japanese were honourable and everything like that, because in most cases they just needed to shop and get on with their lives.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to like, oh, we're bad. Like if they tried to do that, the Americans would probably just shoot them down or just be like, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Essentially, that's what it is.
Okay. Like I said, I wasn't. I'm not sure.
It might be something to go other episode.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we can just talk about Nazi Germany and that sort of general idea in an episode of itself.
We could just go round and round about World War II, really, couldn't we? Because there's just so much to cover.
I think it could take us a week to talk. Like, we could have it over 5 or 6 episodes just for World War II, and still probably not get everything in there.
And it's up there in one of the worst one of the world.
Yeah.
Along with World War One, and surprisingly, and it's only recently come to knowledge as well about how gruesome it was the Taiping Rebellion in China.
I mean, there is just that many people in China that essentially...
We could do an entire episode on the Taiping Rebellion.
Yeah. So...
Because there's some wacky stuff to go over with that.
So China is just wacky during any war, so...
Episode on the Taiping Rebellion, coming soon.
But I think that's about it to talk about with everyone. I think there's not much more to go on without... Currently, as of this episode, that is...
Is it not like a brief operational history, like the entirety of the unit, rather than just specific people, like where they operated within China, like how they operated within the Japanese military?
It was not necessarily. Like I say, a lot of this is only come out recently because nobody wanted to talk about it.
Okay.
So we've got a base knowledge of what they did.
Still a lot of digging to do.
Yes.
What you're saying.
I know that it was different locations was different units. Well, no, it was Unit 731, but different like groups of this unit.
Oh, so it's just like divided into different sections.
Yes,
so to
essentially. But most of
they were mostly like attached to the Japanese military in a way as they were advancing across Southeast Asia.
No, they were set. It was mostly in Manchuria.
Mostly in Manchuria. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like a tree of the Japanese military, but the scientific side of the tree. So like the sort of.
Again, I happen to make a comparison to Nazi Germany because one thing that I can think of, which might be a good comparison, would be the Einsatzgruppen.
Yes. Essentially.
The Einsatzgruppen death squads. Made up of SS soldiers who roamed behind of the German military.
Yeah, like I said, they were on that level. Like I said, they were a fixed group in specific prison camps and prison buildings and things like that, like compounds. But essentially, they did that sort of. They weren't fighting soldiers, although some of them probably did have military experience. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were soldiers, like sort of the ones in concentration camps and death camps. They were soldiers, but they were more used for the scientific side of everything.
So like they would have like their attached guard units and everything.
Yes.
They would have guards. They would have scientific divisions. Probably like doctors, everything like that, and their commands, and all the way going up to their command staff.
Yeah, there was only a few thousand people involved in 731. So it wasn't that many.
So it was like about a regiment size.
Sort of, yeah. And but just in the final 2 years of the war, was 10 to 12,000 died specifically inside Ishii's group, which is a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
And like I say, but over the 8 years, there was 300,000 people.
Like this is even before World War II even started.
It started before World War II.
So
yes.
this is like the second and third Sino-Japanese War kind of years. So like the mid 1930s. All the way up until the start of World War II, and then all the way through World War II.
Well, I think from what I was understanding as well, it was not even an idea, and then suddenly somebody decided this needs to happen, and then it instantly. It was, this group is happening, this is what your objective is. I believe in their head, in their twisted head, they thought they were doing good things. In their twisted minds. They believed themselves being... I think they thought they were good Samaritans.
You could make that comparison about a lot of people across history.
Yeah.
We're doing good.
Yeah. So like you say, it's a case of that there were twisted people involved in this. But like I say, as of this episode, this is about all the information we have. 6 months' time, there could have been somebody between then and now that's gone into more depth and tried to find these things out, and there might even be a documentary out. I'm not sure. I don't think I've seen I've seen like the infographic show on YouTube has a episode specifically on 731.
I've also noticed as well that I think it's a channel called People's History. I think it was called. They do sort of like documentaries based on specific people in their lives, and there is an episode on Shiro Ishii.
Yeah, so it's probably a similar sort of. It's probably about 7.
I haven't watched it because I wanted to do this episode first before I delved deeper into it.
Like I say, it's all the information that I could find personally, with everything that I've read through and just found out over. I only found out about this less than 6 months ago, I reckon. It's very recent that I found out about this. But as soon as I did a couple of things, I was like, I don't know if I need to know more, but I think it's a case of I wanted to know more to know what happened. Like, it was one of those intriguing sort of, I wonder, why is this so bad? It was one of those things. And my history mind came to the forefront and was like, right, you need to know about this.
Your curiosity got the best of you in this case.
Yeah. That's why like I say, and between this and 6 months down the line, a lot more might have come out, and there might be people that, like descendants of the people involved, that have said they've got this thing and this and that. But like I say, as of right now, I think this is about as much as I can remember and as much as we know, essentially.
Okay, so a bit of a shorter episode, but with the limited knowledge that we have, I'd say that we've done okay in this.
This was more of an episode so people knew about this.
Yes, this was entirely informative.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone else that I know.
Don't go out doing this yourself. It's not cool. It's the worst that you could possibly do, because it's a war crime.
Don't put that to the test, please. You can't say something like that. People will go out and now try and make things worse. So we don't condone this.
It's just human nature. It's human nature. If you tell them to not do, if you tell a human to not do something, that is exactly the one thing that they do.
Yeah, but I'm also not going to tell them to do this.
We'll just have one listener just listening on their phone, just like, hey, don't do this. It's just like, oh yeah,
yeah,
and then we'll see it in the news a couple of weeks down the line, just like, oh no.
Like, get told off for making kids violent. We are not taking responsibility for people going out and doing this. This is not. Please no.
I mean, Eminem just made music. These are fucking war crimes, mate. That's not a good comparison.
Best I could come up with.
Oh man.
But yeah, so If more comes out, I might mention it on an episode at some point at the end where we spend 10 minutes talking about it. But as of now, this is about all we've got.
Okay then.
Like I said, this was just so people knew of this thing. If you want to know more, I'd probably keep on top of it, and there's probably threads on.
You can probably do your own research as well.
Yeah, there's probably things that possibly like on Japanese websites where there might be a bit more about this than I can.
I mean, as I said, the
understand.
Japanese probably won't talk about it all that much.
Not necessarily, but I guess if people are doing this, taking it upon themselves to do this under like sort of, I suppose, anonymous things, you can't really. But there might, like I said, there might be things somewhere that I just, because it's Japanese, I just can't understand. Don't speak Japanese, don't understand Japanese. There might be more, but this is what I found myself.
Maybe.
But
Maybe.
yeah, so this was just an informative episode that I'm guessing almost everybody that's listening to this didn't know this existed. And that
Most
was
likely not, no.
And that's the idea. That's what MacArthur wanted. He didn't want people to find out of this. So the top American people knew the information. And
Well, I mean, if people did find out on a larger scale, especially back then, with the amount of life that they've had, they would probably be quite angry.
yes.
And
So
specifically Chinese, they would want blood.
yeah.
They would
Oh
want,
yeah.
They'd probably want like a fountain of blood from Mount Fuji.
But
They still condemn Japan to this day.
of course
For
you
the
can't
amount of
not,
war
can you?
crimes that they did,
Of
they did,
course.
and Japan just like sitting there, just like.
Japan's one of those just always committed war crimes.
Well, I mean, it's just an entirely different culture over
Yeah.
there as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Like I say, it's always been a militaristic culture, so
It's always been very heavily honor based as well.
Yeah.
So you know.
yeah. But yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's it for this episode. We've got an Instagram, obviously.
So
Dear Historia Pod.
the Day Historia Pod,
got-
Instagram.
There's people that are following it now that are just normal people following the podcast. So
Fair enough.
if they're listening, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for your support on this.
Absolutely. The podcast name, and I've been replying to some people on like history threads and stuff. Somebody asked about what's a time in history that people underrate or forgotten about, and I told them a little bit about the Muslim invasion of Spain, which is a lot of people don't know about that.
That's about the 8th century, isn't it?
It started in the 8th century, the middle 8th
that's
century.
that's about the
8th to the 14th century
that's
sort of time.
about the Umayyad Caliphate, isn't it?
Yes. So it went all the way up to Philip II. It was a very long time. But yeah, so like I say, and then somebody asked about what happened to Henry VIII's wives, and you're not allowed to self-promote in a lot of the groups. I was like warily saying, have a listen. We can explain a bit more with the podcast. So if that's you, if you decided to stay and listen to other episodes,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, of course. So, but I think I'm going to make a TikTok at some point. Probably going to make a business email, just in case people decide that they want to come on and talk about something. You can email that
Yep.
and
Business
we can go.
Business correspondence would probably
Yeah, of
be
course.
a good route to go down.
Other than that, I'm not sure if there's much else. Yeah, Instagram. I'll make a TikTok. I'm thinking about doing a YouTube and making this a video form with in the background. So when we change when we talk about this, it'll be a picture up of probably the unit, because there's a picture that it was one of the things that made me get into it. There's a picture of one of the groups of the unit, like a football picture. You know, like when a football team take a picture, they all lined up and they're all. It was essentially like that, and I was like, oh, but I've just read this about them, and they seem like a perfectly normal group of soldiers. So.
Oh, how wrong you
Yeah,
were!
yeah, exactly. So.
Oh, how wrong
Yeah.
you were!
So I'll be possibly trying to do that, because I've noticed on YouTube people take views for nothing. So, you know. So yeah, obviously, and I'm gonna try my best to try and solve Apple Podcasts, because that's a stress. I was trying to figure that out, and it wanted me to validate my existence. I did that, and then it told me again, you need to wait till it's validated. So I was like, I'm going to try with that. There is a Twitter, X, whatever. It's Pod Day Historia. Yeah, so that's all of us social medias at the minute. Yeah, that's about it. I'm not sure what the next episode is going to be. It might be the Revolutionary War. It might be a different episode if we can't find the logistics again to pull that off. Might be another one next week. We're going to try as best for weekly uploads. Yeah, so I think we're done for this one.
Then. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.